What is it?
I have you to thank for it. For the first time in my life, when confronted with a horrible, insensitive person, I knew exactly what I wanted to say, and I said it.
At the peak of her fame, Meg Ryan seemed completely untouchable. The kind of star who didn't just succeed, but defined an entire era. She wasn't just popular, she was trusted by audiences in a way that very few actors ever are. When people went to the cinema in the 1990s, they weren't just watching a movie, they were buying into a feeling, an experience, and more often than not, that experience was shaped by her presence on screen. Her films brought in hundreds of millions of dollars. Her name alone could carry a project, and her paychecks reflected that rare status. At a time when massive salaries were typically reserved for male leads, she was earning at the very top of the industry. She became known as America's sweetheart, the face of romance on screen, and someone audiences believed in. But that kind of image, as powerful as it is, can also be fragile, and when it began to crack, everything changed faster than anyone expected. Her rise to that level didn't happen overnight. Born Margaret Hyra in Connecticut, she came from a relatively ordinary background, with both parents working as teachers. She eventually adopted the name Meg Ryan, a small shift that would go on to become globally recognized. Her path into acting wasn't guaranteed either. She studied at university but left just before completing her degree to chase a career that offers very few guarantees. Early work in television, particularly on a soap opera, gave her the foundation she needed, teaching her discipline and helping her develop her craft. But she had bigger ambitions. She wanted to move beyond daytime television and into film, where the stakes and the rewards were much higher. Her breakthrough came with a supporting role in a major blockbuster, where audiences first began to notice her presence. It wasn't the kind of role that instantly makes someone a star, but it opened the door. A few years later, that door was blown wide open with a film that would define not only her career but an entire genre. From that point on, she became synonymous with romantic comedies, starring in a series of hugely successful films that dominated the box office. Her on-screen chemistry with co-stars became legendary, particularly in films where audiences could see themselves reflected in the characters. People didn't just watch her, they connected with her. Throughout the 1990s, she built a career that seemed almost unstoppable. Film after film succeeded, and her reputation as a reliable box office draw only grew stronger. But she wasn't content to stay in one lane. She took on more serious roles as well, proving that she could handle complex dramatic characters just as effectively as lighter material. This balance helped solidify her as more than just a romantic comedy actress. By the end of the decade, she had reached a level of success that very few achieve, with financial rewards and industry respect to match. Behind the scenes, however, her personal life was far more complicated than the image presented on screen. She was married to actor Dennis Quaid, a relationship that began when both were building their careers. At the time they met, he was arguably the more established name, but as her career skyrocketed, the dynamics shifted. Fame has a way of altering relationships, especially when one partner's visibility grows significantly more than the other's. Over time, that imbalance created tension. Quaid later spoke openly about how it felt to be overshadowed, describing moments where he felt almost invisible, despite being a successful actor himself. Their relationship also faced other challenges, including struggles with personal issues that added further strain. Although they built a family together and shared significant moments, the foundation of their marriage had begun to weaken long before it officially ended. By the time they separated, it wasn't a sudden collapse, but the result of years of underlying problems. Still, when the breakup became public, the narrative that followed didn't reflect that complexity. At the center of the controversy was Russell Crowe, a co-star she met while working on a film at the turn of the millennium. Crowe was already known for his intense personality and strong screen presence, and the connection between them quickly became apparent. What started as professional chemistry developed into something more, and soon they were being seen together off set. Photographs and reports began to surface, fueling speculation and giving tabloids exactly the kind of story they thrive on. The timing of their relationship became the focal point of public attention. Because it overlapped with the end of her marriage, many assumed that the new romance was the cause of the breakup. That assumption quickly turned into a widely accepted narrative, one that painted her in a negative light. The nuance of a relationship that had already been struggling for years was lost, replaced by a simpler, more sensational story. She later pushed back against that version of events. explaining that her marriage had effectively ended long before the public became aware of it, but by then the damage to her image had already been done. The relationship with Crowe itself was intense but short-lived. They spent time together across different countries, appearing close and deeply involved, but it didn't last beyond a year. Reports from those around them described a connection that was passionate but overwhelming, particularly given the circumstances surrounding it. After her divorce, she wasn't necessarily in a place to commit to something so consuming, and differences in lifestyle and location made things even more difficult. Eventually, they went their separate ways, quietly ending the relationship without much public explanation. What lingered, however, was the impact of the scandal. The public perception of her shifted dramatically. The same person who had been celebrated for bringing warmth and charm to the screen was now being criticised and judged. The industry, which often relies heavily on public image, began to distance itself. Roles became less frequent, and the kind of projects she had once been offered without question were no longer guaranteed. It wasn't just the relationship that changed things, it was how that relationship was framed and consumed by the media. As if that wasn't enough, further challenges followed. A widely discussed television interview added to the narrative that she was difficult or distant, reinforcing a perception that had already begun to form. At the same time, her choice of roles started to shift. She moved away from the genre that had defined her career and took on darker, more complex projects. While this demonstrated her range, those films didn't achieve the same level of success, either critically or commercially. The combination of changing public perception and less successful projects created a turning point in her career. Eventually, she stepped away from the spotlight for a period, focusing on other aspects of her life and taking a break from the constant scrutiny. During that time, discussions about her appearance also became a topic of public conversation, adding another layer of attention that had little to do with her work. It reflected a broader pattern in the industry, where actresses often face intense scrutiny over changes in their appearance as they age. Over the years, she's spoken more openly about that period, offering a perspective that differs from the headlines that once defined her story. She has described the experience as both painful and freeing, explaining that being judged so publicly forced her to let go of worrying about others' opinions. Instead of being defined by the narrative surrounding her, she chose to move forward on her own terms. The relationship that once dominated headlines became just one part of a much larger story, not the defining moment it was once made out to be. In time, both she and Crowe moved on with their lives, each following their own paths. While their relationship was brief, its impact was significant, shaping public perception and influencing the trajectory of her career in ways that few could have predicted. Looking back, the story is far more complex than it initially appeared, involving not just a relationship but the intersection of fame, media, and personal struggles. Ultimately, what stands out is how quickly success can shift under the weight of public scrutiny. One moment, she was at the very top of the industry, trusted and admired by millions. The next, she was navigating a completely different reality, where perception mattered just as much as performance. And yet, despite everything, she has continued to redefine her path, proving that even after a fall from such heights, it's possible to rebuild and move forward in a way that feels authentic.